Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Murthy Reihl Lecture Series 2026. I'm here today, and then everyone that is attending virtually. Today's lectures, Beyond Algorithms, the Human Responsibility in AI and Guiding AI for Global Good, invites us to look beyond the technical side of AI and reflect on the human values, ethical responsibilities, and global impact that come with building and using these powerful technologies. As AI continues to shape our world, from healthcare to education, from business to public policy, it becomes increasingly important that we guide its use thoughtfully, responsibly, and with a commitment to the greater good. At the end of this lecture, we will have a Q&A session, so please feel free to save your questions for that time. Following the event, we warmly invite you to join us for a lunch reception. Lunch will be served in room 107 in this building. Room 108, adjacent to 17, is also reserved for you for sitting and dining. Thank you again for being here today. Now it is my honor to invite to the stage the president of our college, Dr. Ferdinand.
Well, that's a great start. And let me tell you, I am so impressed that we have students filling this room. But as we walked in, this sort of the funny sight that we saw was all these seats were just about empty. All the students were in the back rows. Now, see, the rest of you had to fill in, but here we are today. So welcome. Actually, I want to thank our colleagues for organizing this event, and also welcome our speakers that we will hear today. But it is really my great pleasure to welcome all of you to this annual lecture. And this special event arises from the talent and the generosity of two very special women. First is Dr. Donna Reihl, a former CCBC colleague who passed away in 2011. She was an amazing leader, full of life, full of fun, and loved our students. And the second is sitting right up here. She's the one who's making all the noise. This is attorney Sheila Murthy. She's the president of the Murthy Law Firm, and I'll formally introduce her shortly. But on the passing of her great friend, Donna, Sheila generously established an endowment to support this global education lecture, and its intent is really to broaden the view of students. So we really welcome a room full of students today. But before we introduce the speakers, let me just say a few words about the significance of this lecture. CCBC is a comprehensive community college, and we are passionately committed to our open door. It's an open door mission of universal access and universal success. Our college is a microcosm of the communities we serve. If you merely look back there, you will see the truth of that statement. We have students from around the corner and students from around the world, you might say. And we have a mantra here, and the mantra is every one of us. You, that means you, that means you, that means you. And because we believe that, then we also say we're committed to taking action. And I think our commitment to global education and this lecture are indeed examples of taking actions that matter. Under the leadership of Dr. Rebecca DeWitt, who's the director of CCBC's Global Education Program, we've hosted Fulbright scholars, foreign dignitaries. Our faculty have served on State Department panels. They've globalized the curricula across the college. They lead study abroad programs and engage in virtual global learning with faculty and students at partner institutions from abroad. So you see our commitment is deep, and it is meaningful, and it is meant to embrace and to influence the thinking of the students who sit in our classrooms. Because in those classrooms, we have the intersection of nations. We welcome several hundred international students to CCBC each year from 45 countries. So on any given day, in any classroom at CCBC, you can find a nephew of an African tribal chief, the daughter of a Nepalese Sherpa, or a Vietnamese elder sitting next to a doctor's son from Perry Hall, or a single mom from Dundee. That is all part, every one of us. So this landscape suggests that we owe our students a chance to understand and to interface with a wired, international, and interconnected world. Our college's reach is global, and yet our commitment to educate students to fit into this technologically literate yet humane citizenry able to thrive and not just survive as a global village is very, very local. And because of that, our community college is proud to offer a lecture such as the one we will hear today. So I think that since the topic is AI, and since we used to think of that as science fiction, and science fiction yet ain't anymore, yes. And so we brought an expert here to talk to us about AI as a human amplifier, probably more than a human replacement. And just as we once had to learn how to use electricity and cell phones and computers, we are going to master the use of AI, and we're going to have a guide towards that journey today. So with both pride and pleasure, let me introduce the namesake of our lecture series. She is the one who will introduce them in a moment. And I also want to say that Sheila Murthy has been just an amazing friend of the college. She's a talented, progressive, and buoyant lover of life. That's why she's down here doing the cheering and so forth. That is her. She's just wonderful. But she is an entrepreneur. She's a philanthropist. She's the founder and president of the Owings Mills-based Murthy law firm, ranked as one of the world's leading U.S. immigration law firms. She is a woman who has excelled in the challenging area of immigration law, and it is through her generosity that we host this lecture each year as part of our commitment to welcome students into the world as global village. If I may.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Great to see you all. We're so excited to have so many of you join us. I know the topic is fantastic, fascinating. I'm eager and ready to learn with all of you. And when Dr. Kurtenitis said, ooh, there's lunch after this, I was like, I hope it's not just the lunch, but also the learning, because when I was in college, free food was always a very big plus point in attending many lectures, because we're always hungry, you're growing, and you need to feed the mind and the body. But we are so excited to have you here today. Thank you for joining. We have two fantastic cutting-edge speakers that are going to talk on a cutting-edge topic. We have Dr. Christine Ross, who I understand has just joined us a few minutes ago, speaking first, and then Dr. Joshua Pace, speaking right after, both really leaders, cutting-edge people who are doing work in an area that all of us can continue to learn from at this time. Again, as Dr. Kurtenitis pointed out, my friend Donna Reihl is the reason that I started this, gave the initial seed funding for this program and this series. She was a dear friend. She was actually chair of the Girl Scouts of Central Maryland right before me and got me involved, and I became the chair of the Girl Scouts. It's all about changing future minds. It's all about helping young people succeed in life. And for those who may not know a little bit about my background, my father came from a very poor family, but for the education and doing well and being the only person among all his siblings to actually get a degree, we would have probably all been, really poor people, because there were like 13 kids in a small room. It was growing up with nothing much in this life. And so he always taught us when we were little, to whom much is given, much is expected, and to make sure that if God has been good to you and you've gotten some grown in life, and you can give and share your time, your talent, your treasure, that it is your moral, legal, ethical responsibility, it is a debt to society, that we share whatever we can with others to watch others come up in life, because we're all going to be gone one day, and as I'm growing older, that feels closer than 30 or 40 years ago, and the only thing we give is the goodwill, the good karma, the seeds that we plant for a better world, to make the world a better place. And I can't think of a better organization in Maryland to support than CCBC. Each of you deserves the best. Dr. Kurtenitis is a super duper rock star that I remember when she first came and we had that big party for her when she first joined. Was it what, 15 years, 20 years ago? 21 years ago. We all grow old together, and wiser, not just older. But you know what? I embrace it. I'm from Asia. Old age is considered something to be given respect. So you know what? Thank you so much for being here. Let me introduce Dr. Christine Rosen. She's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where she focuses on U.S. history, my subject, society and culture, and technology and human behavior. Talk about cross-interdisciplinary, that you will hear similar themes from both Dr. Joshua and Dr. Christine Rosen. She's also a monthly columnist for Commentary Magazine, co-host of the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast, a fellow at the UVA, University of Virginia's Institute for Advanced Studies in Culture, and senior editor at the New Atlantis. She was previously a distinguished visiting scholar at the Library of Congress. She has a PhD in history from Emory University. She holds a third-degree black belt in Aikido and teaches martial arts. So don't mess with her, but luckily she's on the screen, so we don't have to worry, right? She lives with her family in Washington, D.C., and because she has an event right after this, she regrets that she's not able to join us in person, but she's certainly joining us, and Dr. Rosen, we expect you to make up with your excitement, your passion, your anger on the screen by years. So I know I can wrap up, but among her many books are the award-winning The Extinction of Experience, which I hope you're wrong. Oops, we just lost her. Oh, there you go, thank goodness. And My Fundamentalist Education, a memoir of a divine girlhood. Ooh, it's nice to know that there are girls they're growing up as divine. Her opinion pieces, articles, and reviews have appeared in the LA Times, National Affairs, National Review, New Atlantis, New Republic, New York Times, MIT Technology Review, Politico, Slate, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and the New England Journal of Medicine, among many other outlets. So you can see we are in for a treat with a discussion. So take it away, Dr. Rosen.
Well, thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I will note at the outset the irony that I'm about to talk to you about human connection while unfortunately coming to you through a screen. So I appreciate that you allowed me to do this virtually. I actually have students I'm teaching in about 2 hours, and so here in DC. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. I want to ask a question that might seem obvious, but I think is no longer obvious in a world with artificial intelligence. What does it mean to be human? I think we always assumed we knew the answer to that when we didn't have any challenges to what we thought humans could do that was unique. We could create art, literature, music, all kinds of things that were uniquely human. All of those things are now being challenged by some of our extraordinary technological tools. And I'm sure that not any of you ever used ChatGPT to make your assignments go a little more quickly or easily or any of these other things. I don't want to talk about the efficiencies of AI or its existential risks and threats. There are a lot of challenges with regard to how we might conduct future warfare, what it might do in terms of upheaval to the economy and is already doing in some of these arenas. I'm interested in something much more mundane, but I think just as important. How does it disrupt our human relationships? What does it mean for us to get along and to be human in a world where a lot of human functions will already now and soon likely will be outsourced to technology? So I'd start with what I think what our screens have already done to our formative institutions, which is the screen is now our formative institution. For a lot of people growing up in the world today, the screen is a much more powerful force in one's life from childhood all the way through to early adulthood. Whether it's using the screen in school, an iPad in kindergarten, a smartphone when you're in middle school or high school, the screen is the portal through which a lot of people have been trained to understand their world and to understand their relationships with other human beings. But I'm going to posit something that might sound a little dramatic or over the top, but I hope I will back it up with the case I'll make this morning. And that's that every new thing is not necessarily an improvement. So when we think about technology, new things that promise us ease, efficiency, seamlessness in our relationships and our interactions with the world, we are excited about this. We all use these things every day. I use them in my own work all the time. But the question of what we give up when we embrace a new tool is not one that I think we ask often enough. American society in particular, historically has been a very techno-enthusiastic culture. We love new things. We prize innovation and entrepreneurship, all of which are important and necessary forces to keep our economy dynamic and strong. But we do also need to account for the things that we lose when we adopt a new tool. So I'm not talking about lamenting the decline of the horse and buggy in favor of the car and the combustion engine. But when it comes to our human relationships, we are now in a culture that really pushes us to adopt and engage with synthetic bots, relationship bots, AI-fueled relationship tools that will eventually possibly replace human relationships. So what does that mean when we start to use these tools? So I want, in the brief time that I have, to focus in particular on these friendship chatbots. I don't know how many of you have used them. I've been studying them since they first were being developed by some of these tech companies. And what I've going as far back as when the first early chatbot, which was Eliza, developed in the previous century by an MIT scientist, how quickly we can be fooled and drawn in to humanizing something that is itself not human. Now, we all like to think we're rational. We know it's a chatbot. It's not real. But the way that a lot of these new tools are designed are encouraging us to forget that very quickly once we come embedded in a relationship with a technological tool like a chatbot. So if you think about, if you used Facebook back in the day, it co-opted the word friend to make it seem like friends or anyone who happened to be connected to you on the platform. You were rewarded by collecting more friends. Online friendship became very convenient and controlled. The same thing happened when you interacted, whether it's your Instagram followers, Snapchat. All of these platforms are designed to suggest that it's fine to replace interactions in person, face to face, which we know to be deeply valuable, with mediated relationships. So we're all habituated to that. What's interesting to me is how we're now becoming very quickly habituated to these new chatbots. So there was a survey done last year by YouGov, and it found that 1 in 4 young adults believe that AI has the potential to replace real-life romantic relationships. So that I was shocked to see that and hear that until I also was looking at some of the data for loneliness, anxiety, some of these things that suggest that we're not all flourishing as human beings in our private worlds. And so obviously it would become very appealing to have something you could chat with when you're feeling down. But as a couple of researchers who published some work in the MIT Technology Review noted, what they called for a warning and some of the risks of these relationships because they form what they called addictive intelligence. It takes advantage of what we already know about human behavior. It develops what's called sycophancy, meaning the tool can start to tell us more of what we want to hear. And there are lots of these tools already coming to market. There are necklaces and lanyards with embedded sensors that can chat with you all day, see what you see. So these are already here. We know about, if you know about Character AI or Replica, these are chatbot services to which you can subscribe, and you can create a kind of perfect friend or chat with your version of your favorite, fictional character or movie. So what all of this means for people in need can be fine. I mean, if you have healthy human friendships in the real world, having a chatbot pal might not make much of an impact. But for people who are vulnerable, for people who are lonely, for people who are suffering from some sort of mental health challenge, these can be absolutely dangerous. So there was a Florida teenager who ended up committing suicide, urged on by his chatbot to do this, to come join her in the realm that he was spending more and more time in. And there are unfortunately numerous stories of people becoming very connected, deeply connected. And we know this from our longtime research with human-computer interaction. We also know that there are a lot of potential privacy risks when people start chatting with chatbots that can sell your information to third parties. So All of these devices, again, are sold to us as artificial friendship is fine. It gives you an outlet. You can talk with someone. Maybe it helps you with therapy. But my concern is this. One of the things that's great about being human is how quirky, quixotic, unpredictable, and strange we all are. This is a superpower, and it's not one that's being embedded in these chatbots. So here's an example. One of the chatbots I studied, but which is being used by, I would say, middle school, high school kids. Say they have a friend who they've had a falling out with. So they turn to the chatbot, they chat with the chatbot, and the chatbot reaffirms in this sycophantic cycle they're being upset with their friend, saying supportive things like, "You're right, she wasn't fair to you," or "That was mean." Or say a kid tells its chatbot, "My mom wants me to help with the laundry, and I think that's unfair." The chatbot will, again, reaffirm your feelings. The problem is that in the real world, if someone's a real friend to you and you say something like, "I didn't want to do this," they will call you to account. They will hold you responsible for your behavior because they love you and they care for you. And they know that what might frustrate you now might still be good for you down the line. And that is something that a chatbot can't do. So what does this all mean in terms of how we think about the use of these tools going forward? I would suggest that what some of our ChatGPT interaction logs and other early chatbot use suggests is that these are dangerously efficient at getting us to connect to them in a deeply human way without any responsibility for us that another human being would have. So we should pursue interactions with these tools very cautiously. As adults, you're welcome to use them, but I would say think about how quickly you can start to prefer the chatbot relationship to the difficulties of a real human relationship, where your friends might not show up on time, or they might be cranky, or any of the other normal parts of human interaction that the chatbot doesn't demand of you. You do not want to become habituated to a world where you expect your relationships to be on demand, sycophantic, and seamless, because human relationships are not like that. The other thing I would advise, and then I'll wrap it up and turn it over to our next speaker, is that we be very cautious about allowing children to use some of these tools. We know from more than a decade of social media use by young children that there have been some damaging effects for kids writ large. Causation is difficult to prove, but we can see some rising concerns, particularly with mental health, with children who spend a lot of time on these platforms. We are seeing early signs of a similar sort of dysfunctional relationship for young children who spend a lot of time having discussions with a friend bot or a chat bot of some sort, rather than out in the real world with real human beings and engaging in life in that way. So I think we should be very cautious about introducing these too quickly before we have enough data that show that they won't bring harm to some of the children who use them. But as human beings, once again, I would urge you, when someone sells you a new quick tool that's going to make your life easier, you ask two questions. What am I giving up? What is it I'm outsourcing? Am I outsourcing my ability to be a good human? Am I outsourcing cognitive functions that actually might be useful for me down the line? What am I outsourcing? And secondarily, will this new thing actually be an improvement? And by improvement, I mean not making your life more convenient or efficient, but giving you the tools to allow you to have a more flourishing human life with social connections, civic engagement, and deeply obligatory, thoughtful, caregiving human relationships. So I will leave it at that and turn it over to our next speaker. Thanks.
Rosen, do you have time for a few questions or?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, fire away. I love questions.
Sorry, we can't hear you. Are you on mute? We didn't hear you.
I'm on mute. I'm happy to take any questions. Yes.
You have
I'd love
another.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Yes, happy to take questions. Now I can't hear you though. Unfortunately, I can't hear you all now.
Not hearing anything?
Now I can hear you. Nope, and then it just went off again. I heard you and then it was muted. I was able to hear you earlier, so technical issues, I think. Ironically. There's feedback, okay. I mean, maybe someone can put, is there a chat? If there's a chat, I could answer questions in a chat. Let's see. I can't hear, unfortunately, what's going on the stage.
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. But there's feedback.
Are you able to mute her?
Okay, so it says if I mute, I'll mute and you ask questions.
Now can you hear us? Now she can hear us. Okay, we have muted you so that you can hear us clearly. And that way, if we have questions from the audience, because my understanding is you have another class, right? Momentarily, and that's why before we get to our next speaker, we'll hopefully wrap up with you. But what I did want to say is that it was fascinating to hear how, although, because the topic, of course, is the human responsibility in AI and guiding AI for global good, and it sounded like, ooh, AI is going to make us more effective, more efficient. But you're saying, while all that may sound fine and dandy and wonderful and rosy, in fact, by reinforcing what we want to hear, we could actually end up losing in the long run and not have a happy, successful, flourishing life, because it reinforces both the negative and the positive, and mostly the negative feelings we tend to have for whether it's family or friends. So I love that. Any questions from the audience? I know it's always difficult to get the first question and to have the first person raise their hand. It's early in the morning. Okay, we have somebody raising their hand, so you have a question, and what I'm going to do is when that person is speaking, after they speak, then I guess then you unmute yourself, Dr. Rosen.
Should I stand or?
We can hear you, so introduce yourself briefly.
My name is Lee, and I guess I have a question. What do you think maybe there's an underlying material reality that young people in this country face with starting a family, the cost of housing, the cost of childcare, and especially as you get older, when you're younger, it's not as much of an issue, but when you get older and it becomes more and more difficult to have a life with another human being, perhaps this fuels the popularity of these types of friends, these bots.
Thank you for that question, Dr. Rosen.
Yes, this is an absolutely crucial issue. First of all, when you're struggling to sort of launch yourself as a young person into the world, get a steady job, pay your bills, pay off any loans you might have from college, all of those challenges, while also trying to find someone to connect to, someone who might become your partner, with whom you might form a family, and all of that good stuff. When you're habituated to having the challenges of affordability, which are unfortunately likely to get worse before they get better, that's a real struggle right now. The uncertainty of whether there'll be a job for you at the end of your schooling and all of that because of the shifts in the job market. But most importantly, if you're habituated to understanding human connection, and particularly romantic connection, via the apps that most people use to find other people, you perform your sense of self in a very specific way that these platforms urge you to do it. And one of the things I think that it takes away from us is the patience to really unearth the quirks and interesting parts of another human being, because we have to put it all out there on the screen. I like this, I don't like this. And that creates two things. First is an endless sense of market availability. So even if you find someone who really kind of checks all the boxes that you have for a romantic partner, in the back of your mind is, well, there are 4,000 other people on this app who might also check that box. So there's a kind of, I don't want to commit because I could find something better option. The second thing is that it probably weeds out people who you might be open to if you met them in the wild. And by this, I mean, if you have a list of things that you absolutely won't accept in another human being before you even meet them, That's very different than if you happen to meet someone and you connect in some way, and then you find out later, ooh, gross, they like this certain food that I find appalling. You might be more willing to understand that with the picture of the whole rather than if you see their dating profile. So there is that the habits of mind we formed with regard to romantic connection are there too. But your last point, I think, is the one that worries me the most. And I'll give you a little anecdote, which is that recently Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Facebook Meta, was interviewed about some of the mental health crises that have been, I think, exacerbated by use of social media platforms. His company is right now getting sued. His company is now being sued by lots of parents and state's attorney general for harms. So he was asked about this, like, what about all the young people who are very lonely, or just the loneliness crisis? And his response was telling. He said, well, we're going to create chat bots so that everyone will have a friend to talk to. And I thought that is not the answer to the problem. The problem is actually to go out in the world, as uncomfortable as it is, and seek human connection in a way that not only alleviates loneliness for yourself, but makes you understand that you have to be part of a community and you owe others. You have an obligation to others. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of our mediated relationships or these chatbot relationships. We don't owe anyone anything in them. In the real world, we do owe each other something. In public space, we owe each other polite civil engagement. Among our friends, we have obligations to show up for them. And obviously with our family and communities, all kinds of obligations. The obligation part of our relationships now often disappears when we mediate them. And I think that does make a lot of those issues of connection long-term more challenging, to say nothing of, as you noted, the affordability issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosen. Great question, Lee. And I guess Mark Zuckerberg won't make a few billion more if you go out and meet real people in the real world. He's going to only make it with more chatbots and more money. So, of course, his solution is going to be, let's create a chatbot for you rather than get your butt out there and go make some friends and get your butt kicked in the process. Because at the end of the day, we all have to deal with real world and real problems and maybe bad breath and all of that stuff that comes with the real relationship, right? So that was a great, great point. Maybe we'll allow one more question if there is one more, and then I'll introduce Dr. Joshua. Okay, we have someone in the, a question here. Do you have any advice for how to talk to students about these concerns?
Yes. When I talk to students, I usually ask them to do one thing, which is to take a day and experiment with not picking up your phone and looking at it during interstitial moments of time. And they always look sort of baffled. And I said, like when you're waiting to meet a friend, or you're waiting for the bus, or, a meeting's about to start or a class is about to start, and you got 5 minutes, don't pick up your phone. And if you do that for 24 hours, what you'll notice is how habituated we have all become, and I include myself in this. I have to run this experiment on myself all the time, how habituated we've become to escaping our feelings by looking at a screen. So instead of sitting and being, bored, impatient, annoyed, and sitting with that feeling and processing that feeling and understanding it, we can just pick up a screen. Now for adults, so I'm Gen X, so I'm old. So I was a hybrid generation. As a kid, I didn't have the option of picking up a phone when I was bored. I had to go figure it out. That experience taught me a lot of good habits, though, down the line, like imagination, letting my mind wander, trying to entertain myself by reading a book or climbing a tree, or any of these things that were the only options at the time. All of this is to say, you have to practice these human skills. So if you don't go out and know how to make polite, casual conversation with a stranger, that's a skill you lack. And when you go out into the world, you'll need that skill, but it's something you have to practice. So one thing besides trying not to escape your feelings in those interstitial moments of time, I encourage students, my own students included, to just, in the wild, go talk to people, be pleasant. Instead of using the CVS automatic checkout, go talk to the one person who still works behind the register and say, hello, engage other human beings. It will shock you how interesting your day will be if you try that for 24 hours, and you might see the difference. I mean, I had parents who were pretty strict about things like boredom. If I complained about boredom, they were like, well, that's a problem for you. Go find something to do. And I think all of us now, because we have at our fingertips these devices which can capture our attention immediately, can help us escape uncomfortable feelings, we're losing those human skills of learning how to cope with those feelings. And as you said a moment ago, we will find ourselves in situations where we can't escape the reality of what's going on in the world. When we become sick, when we have to wait by a loved one's bedside when they are sick, when there is an emergency and we have to know how to act and know how to be effective human beings in dealing with other people. Those are skills, and now we have to practice them because we have the option of not using them because of these extraordinary devices.
So much. I love what Ann Roberts just said. My mom used to say to us when we were young and complained that we were bored. You're not bored, you're boring, go find something good in the world. That echoes a lot of what you just said. And I remember a family member once said, only boring people ever get bored. And so that sort of resonates. But thank you so much. Let's give one more round of applause. Good luck with your next class, and we're happy you could join us, even if it was just virtually. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Okay, let's continue the conversation. I'm honored to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Joshua Pais, who serves as an assistant dean in the School of Technology, Trades, Business, and Hospitality. At that competition, not too far down the road, but no competition, because we're all here to learn, grow, and become, because we are one big happy family under God's earth, right? At the Frederick Community College, a linguist by training and a technologist by practice, Dr. Pais works to bridge the gap between the humanities and computer science. Wow, nice. I love this intersection stuff, right? It's where everything in the world is left brain, right brain combination. His recent work explores how generative AI reshapes expertise and pedagogy in English language teaching, a topic which he has extensively published in titles such as Collaborative AI and Artificial Intelligence Real Teaching. By the way, for our firm slogan, it is, there's nothing artificial about our AI, attorney intelligence for us. So I like that real and artificial play on the terms. His perspective on the topic is heavily informed by his doctoral work in applied linguistics at Purdue University and his current graduate studies in applied computer science at the George Washington University, focusing on how global educational systems can navigate the shift towards an AI-augmented future in ways that preserve the best of what is innately human. You can see you're a dean there at Frederick Community, but you're still pursuing at GW your master's degree. Learning never stops. There is never an age, not that I'll finish this degree and get me a job and I'm done for the work. Learning is a lifelong process, and I love, love, love it. Let's give a round of applause and welcome Dr. Pais. Thank you.
Thank you for that very warm introduction, and I love the enthusiasm. Prior to joining the administratum at Frederick Community College, I spent 15 years in college classrooms across the United States and the People's Republic of China, so I appreciate a lot of energy, especially this early in the morning. That being said, I am also a little neurodivergent myself, so once I begin my talk, I will stick pretty closely to my notes, and I hope you'll take that as a sign of how seriously I take our time together. I'm going to begin this the way that I begin every talk on artificial intelligence, whether it's been in Bahrain, in the United States, here, or in China, which is with a couple of questions to all of you, because I think it's important that I know who I'm speaking to. How many of you, when you hear the terms artificial intelligence, are like, to paraphrase Hulk Hogan, maybe before some of your time, hell yeah, brother, you're super excited. AI is the future and you are here and plugged in. You are a cyborg. All right. How many of you are ambivalent? You want to wait and see how this all plays out? Fair. And how many of you are part of the potentially growing population of neo-Luddites who would just as soon burn this technology to the ground? Beautiful. I ask these questions because I want to say no matter what your orientation to artificial intelligence is, you are welcome here, right? I firmly believe that you don't need a degree in computer science to approach this topic, though it can help in preventing folks like Mark Zuckerberg from hoodwinking you with a shiny new tool that actually isn't anything that new or that shiny or that helpful. I want to begin by acknowledging, as my introducer did, that I come to this topic from an interdisciplinary perspective. And this is because the problems facing us in the latter half of the 2000s are going to be inherently interdisciplinary problems. The days of the linguist owning a field or the computer scientist owning a field must come to an end. Because when they do, we see things like Mark Zuckerberg's response to loneliness. Well, I'll build you a chatbot, right? And as we saw from our first presenter, the problem is much more complex than people just needing something to talk to, right? So I want to acknowledge my own intersectionality in this, right, by saying that I come at this both from an administrative perspective now, helping to lead a school at a small community college just a little bit west of here, right, where I need to respond to industry pressures to create an AI-ready workforce, right? But I also come to this from the educator's perspective. I spent 15 years in the classroom, and I know the very real threat when students outsource their learning to a chatbot. But I also know how quickly it can erode trust and relationship in the classroom when we, the professorate, view our jobs as policing what's going on there, right? Beyond that, there's my own professional intersectionality. I am an applied linguist by training, right? That's where I got my start doing work on inclusive and equitable classroom practices for gender and sexual minority students, right? So the fact that we are in the humanities building today thrills me to my core, right? I am also a budding applied computer scientist, which is saying I do all the programming and data analytics, but without the pesky maths. I hope I don't have any math professors in here. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So fun fact, at Frederick Community College, I supervise everything from computer science to hospitality, from cybersecurity and trades to mathematics. And when I got that position, my spouse turned to me and asked, Matt, did they meet you? Yes, yes they did. Now, without any further ado, I'm going to start diving in to today's presentation, which has that really catchy preamble of synthetic sovereignty. This is a phrase that I want us all to mull over and to try and see where it fits into larger conversations about global compute and humanity in what's been called the age of AI. It asks, in a world where AI increasingly mediates knowledge and interaction, who actually holds the power, and can education at all help people to reclaim even a small portion of it? Now, having given talks like this to populations across the globe, I know how powerful dialogic moments can be. So if I wrap up a few minutes early, know that it's just because I value hearing your voices and your concerns. So here's our map for today. 6 stops, roughly 5 minutes apiece, and I'll do my best to keep us moving at a brisk pace. We'll start with the big global picture, the numbers on who's using AI, who isn't, and why that gap isn't an accident. Then we'll get into some more uncomfortable territory around power and colonialism. This is where the conversation gets genuinely important for institutions like yours and like mine. Institutions designed to empower and to open doors for populations who may have been marginalized and forgotten. From there, we move into practical territory, literacy frameworks, AI tutoring research, and institutional roadmaps. And we'll close with the philosophical question that I think is the most important one of all. What do we lose if we're not intentional about this moment? Again, feel free to hold your questions until the end, because I believe it will be my turn in front of the proverbial firing squad afterwards. But you seem like friendly people, so I'm sure I'll be fine. And if not, that's why you bribed me with lunch. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about AI adoption. By the first quarter of 2026, generative AI adoption has reached approximately 16.3% of the global population. While that may sound impressive, it starts to fall apart once we break it down. In the global north, nearly a quarter of working age adults are using AI tools for learning new skills, interrogating existing knowledge, planning social interactions, and to augment their professional work in an ongoing do more with less labor environment. In the global south, however, that number drops to about 14%. And in Africa, outside of North Africa, which more closely mirrors the patterns that we're seeing emerge in the Middle East, that number is just under 10%. Now here's the part that I want you to really hear. This is not just a gap in numbers. This is structural. Citizens throughout most regions in Africa have lower instances of reliable internet access at only about a quarter of the population. There's also a massive gender gap in smartphone ownership, with women being 29% less likely to own a smartphone than their male peers. And with the rise of AI apps to connect to cloud-based inference and on-device edge AI, smartphones are becoming the primary tool for engaging with artificial intelligence services for a growing segment of the global population. Beyond this, we must also acknowledge that the energy cost of running AI and other forms of planetary compute, such as resource-hungry big data analytics, is likely to become a geopolitical issue. Data centers already consume an estimated 415 terawatt hours a year, and that's set to at least double by the year 2035, with more pessimistic estimates suggesting that it may even triple. For developing nations or ones rebuilding after protracted instability or war, this may mean making the painful choice between powering AI infrastructure to stay competitive in a global labor market, or protecting their national sovereignty, or funding healthcare, education, and reconstruction, seeing to the basic needs of their citizens. So when we talk about AI in global education, we're not talking about an equal playing field. And understand, our tech bro friends in San Francisco would be more than willing to push the narrative that AI will be the great equalizer. We are, honestly, starting from a position of profound inequality. And quite frankly, that shapes a lot of what comes next for us as humans and for education as a collective effort. This slide is where I want to slow down and push back on a comfortable narrative that some of our ed tech friends might try to advance with us, especially early in a new technology adoption cycle, namely that AI is a value-neutral tool that benefits everyone equally. Researchers have identified 4 dimensions of what they're calling digital colonialism in an AI-driven landscape. First, data colonialism. When a student in South Africa at a university takes an AI-proctored exam, their biometric data, their face, their keystrokes, may be processed and stored on servers in the United States under US law and owned by a US company. That student's data then becomes the raw material for training models in which they have no stake, but that may be deployed against them at some point in the future. To me, this isn't just a privacy violation, it's a modern-day resource extraction where human behavior is the new gold. We are our data. What we're witnessing here is the mining of the global South identities to build proprietary systems that the original data subjects can neither afford nor control. When we treat people's very existence as unpaid raw material for foreign profit, we don't just build better models. We solidify a digital glass ceiling that ensures the technological divide becomes a permanent structural part of the global economy. Second, infrastructure dependence. Institutions in Latin America and Africa don't have many viable local cloud alternatives. They're locked into services like Amazon's AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google's cloud. Not by choice, but by necessity. And every year, the cost of growing competitive infrastructure grows by 2 to 3 times. This is a gap that isn't closing, but is instead widening due to AI-driven shortages in resources to build new compute servers. This is a lesson that our comrades in France are learning very hard themselves as they push to decouple from American software as a service and cloud or infrastructure as a service providers. This is the architecture of a new monopoly, where the digital ground that users walk on is owned by a handful of potentially foreign landlords. By the time a local startup or sovereign government tries to build its own foundation, as France is doing now, the rent has very likely already been drained from the very capital needs that they will need to use to compete. This means that users in the global south may not just be buying a service, they may be exporting their very digital sovereignty, ensuring that the critical nervous system of the modern economy remains at the mercy of a kill switch held thousands of miles away. Third, and to me this is potentially the most insidious, is epistemic colonialism. The academic publishing system embodied in tools like Scopus already privileges English language scholarship. This is nothing new. It's been this way since I was sitting in your seats as a student a long time ago, right? But now, AI grading tools trained predominantly on English and on Western academic conventions are producing biased outcomes when evaluating student work, especially when those students are writing in regional languages or when they're writing in non-Western rhetorical traditions. We are literally encoding existing hierarchies into the machine. Left unchecked, this opens the door to the automation of the right way of thinking, a linguistic and cultural flattening. What we're witnessing is the construction of a digital gatekeeper that doesn't just grade students, but instead flattens their culture, punishing any logic that doesn't mirror a Silicon Valley data set. If we allow these algorithms to become the final arbiters of intelligence and of access to resources, we aren't just teaching the next generation, we're colonizing the very way that they perceive and describe their own reality. Fourth, there's a governance gap. I told you I'm an administrator. I think of rules a lot now. The norms and standards and regulations around AI are increasingly being written in places like Brussels, Washington, D.C., and Beijing. Developing nations are largely underrepresented at best or absent at worst from many of these conversations in the halls of global power. What they need isn't just a seat at the table. They need to be able to help define the ethics of our emerging AI era. When individuals are left no choice but to outsource the regulation of their lives to foreign capitals, they often must accept a one-size-fits-all morality that ignores local context, unique histories, and specific needs. They are effectively becoming rule takers in a world where the rule makers have no accountability to local citizens, turning democratic self-determination into a digital era relic. But here is a hopeful counterpoint. The global south is not waiting. They are pushing back. Maskane in Africa, for example, has already published AI translation results for 48 African languages. Chile's Senia built Latin GPT, an open source model trained on 8 terabytes of Spanish and Portuguese data that previously didn't exist in Western AI training sets. Southeast Asian developers are building models that can work natively in Burmese, Indonesian, and Vietnamese. These communities are pursuing what scholars call epistemic delinking, building AI that reflects their own values, their own languages, and their own philosophies. In Africa, for example, this means encoding the very notion of Ubuntu, the idea that a person is a person through the people around them, into their algorithmic systems. Doing so addresses what's called the alignment problem in artificial intelligence, ensuring that AI systems are aligned to human values. And understand, this isn't just about adding local flavor to a chatbot. It's about rebuilding the objective functions of the models themselves. By prioritizing participatory data collection under the Ubuntu model, for instance, over passive scraping like what we do here in the West, these developers are baking the we instead of the I into the machine and how it interacts with the user. They are moving away from the Western winner-takes-all optimization towards a collaborative filtering and multi-agent system that values communal consensus over individual utility. This is part of how we move from an AI that predicts the next word to an AI that respects the next person. To me, this isn't just a technical story, but one of sovereignty in the age of AI. So, we've outlined the problem, and only one small part of it, as we've already seen today. So here I'd like to move us towards a potential solution. And I wouldn't be an educator if that solution didn't involve the word literacy. So, if our challenge is that AI is concentrating power, flattening cultures and languages, then one of the most democratizing, empowering things that we can do is to make sure that every student in every field understands how this technology works. Article 4 of the EU AI Act, for example, has now made this a legal requirement in Europe, requiring anyone deploying or using AI systems on behalf of those deploying those AI to possess sufficient AI literacy. Please note that this extends to other persons dealing with the operation and use of AI systems on these people's behalf. It becomes easy then to argue that we must logically include the end user when their operation of AI tools becomes the fuel for training future models. Importantly, perhaps, the United States is also moving in the same direction with recent guidance from the Department of Labor. Returning to our friends in Europe, however, the European AI Literacy Framework defines AI literacy across 4 practical domains that I find to be particularly portable. I'll walk you through them here and how they map directly to what we should perhaps be teaching across the curriculum in both the 2-year and 4-year higher education space. The foundational layer is about what AI actually is, not the magic burden, but the mathematical reality. How does pattern recognition work? What is a hallucination? What's the difference between training a model and running inference against one? This is the layer where critical thinking with our learners can begin. The functional layer is where students will learn how to work with AI effectively. Prompt engineering, essentially a new form of communication requiring linguistic precision, iterative thinking, and contextual awareness, becomes our primary tool. Even if so-called thinking models, like the paid versions of ChatGPT and Google Gemini, do some of their own prompt engineering or refinement under the hood. It's important to note, however, that prompt engineering doesn't just belong to our friends in computer science, but rather to all of us as a compositional skill. The ethical layer will start to ask students to recognize bias, algorithmic discrimination, and data limitations. At FCC, for example, we're building this into early versions of our own AI literacy course precisely because we serve a diverse student population that will encounter these systems in consequential ways and will need to be empowered to advocate for themselves and their communities. And understand, whether or not you engage with generative AI, AI systems are already being deployed against you. The last time you were in a TSA line, computer vision was used to assess what level of threat you might be. These were trained on massive open data sets of people's pictures, many of them gathered with limited real consent about their use, right? And most of those predisposed towards showing light-skinned faces as happy, joyous faces, and darker-skinned faces as angry and threatened. That bias has been reflected in our computer systems to the fact that our darker-skinned peers that are subjected to these computer vision systems are more often labeled a threat than their lighter-skinned colleagues. The collaborative layer is perhaps the most important for the longer term, using AI as a thinking partner rather than an answer machine. And understand that in a time of gimme, 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 give it quick, this is where we as educators have to force our students to slow down and think alongside of us, modeling those cognitive behaviors that we know will serve them well in the longer run. This requires self-awareness on part of the user about their own disciplinary and domain knowledge. One thing that I've heard from our industry partners across Frederick County is that yes, they want an AI-powered workforce, but the people still need to have the foundational knowledge about that field to make sound judgments. Because when it comes to AI, as our Russian friends say, trust but verify. And you can only verify if you know. So, another part of this then is understanding of our own reasoning processes and our own capacity for social empathy. Balancing that against how we use AI and its outputs and how those outputs might affect our interlocutors. And here's an insight that I want to land. The US Department of Labor is explicit that AI literacy should be taught in context, in history classes, in nursing programs, in business schools, and in culinary classrooms, not quarantined to the computer science or cyber IT departments. Quite frankly, if we're leaving AI literacy to a single program, we're leaving our students behind. Said another way, an interdisciplinary problem truly requires an interdisciplinary response. Now, the reason why so many educators and technologists get excited about artificial intelligence is in part its democratizing influence. In 1984, Benjamin Bloom published what became known as the 2 sigma problem. He found that students who received one-on-one tutoring from a skilled human tutor performed 2 standard deviations better than students in a conventional classroom. That's a difference between an average student and one in the 98th percentile. The problem, however, is obvious. We can't give every student a personal tutor no matter how much we want. The solution simply doesn't scale, it's too expensive. For 40 years, this problem went unsolved, but in 2025, a randomized controlled trial at an undergraduate physics program found something that finally seemed to move the needle. Students using a custom-designed AI tutor, not just vanilla ChatGPT, but an intentionally designed pedagogical tool, learned significantly more in less time than their students in conventional active learning classrooms. Median learning gains were doubled compared to the comparison group. Effect sizes ranged from 0.73 to 1.3 standard deviations, in some cases outperforming even more modern meta-analyses of expert human tutoring. While we haven't hit 2 sigma yet, we're getting close. And the equity implications are potentially profound. Imagine what it means for students in under-resourced schools or in regions facing teacher shortages is if access to custom tutors could be provided. And one of the things that we're seeing at FCC in particular, to share a peek behind the curtain, right, is that part of our student population is being left behind. For us at FCC, that's Black and Latino men, right, male identifying students. They tend to underperform their white peers by a significant margin when it comes to success in our classes. When we dug a little bit deeper, one of the things that we found was because for this group, there was a seemingly shared cultural value in not asking for help when they were struggling. They were significantly less likely to engage in conversations about their grades and their performance with their professors. They were less likely to reach out to their peers for help, right? So if part of that is a concern about how they're being perceived, then perhaps an AI tutor could help bridge that gap and could help equip them with the language necessary to advocate for themselves and to see the value behind having those conversations early. Conversely, however, we can also imagine the access nightmare created by early monetization so that only students with financial means can access the most powerful and most capable models, getting output that is head and shoulders above what their peers using the free open access versions can get. And here we reach another critical caveat. This all only works with carefully engineered AI systems, not off-the-shelf things like ChatGPT, Claude, or Google Gemini. The researchers, Peston et al., identified 3 technical mechanisms necessary to make this work for students. The first is retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. This connects AI to a curated database of peer-reviewed content and vetted knowledge, meaning that the system draws from verified textbooks and research papers rather than generating plausible-sounding nonsense. Additionally, these systems must have a low temperature setting, controlling for randomness, and introducing a bit of determination into the responses. And finally, and this is the part that all of us educators in the room can start to address, is that cognitive scaffolding, teaching both our students and our systems how to chunk information, build on prior knowledge, and prevent overload of working memory. Understand, however, that this isn't just plug and play. It's where instructional design meets AI engineering. Shifting from the educators in the room to my fellow leaders, we need to start asking ourselves how our institutions are going to move forward. How do we empower our people that work with our students every day? And how do we enable our students to succeed in an increasingly AI-mediated world? One path forward is the WSET roadmap. This is the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education's cooperative on educational technologies. And their AI policy and practices ecosystem is one that I find to be particularly germane. It also maps quite nicely to what we're attempting to do at FCC slowly but surely. The framework organizes institutional action into 3 priority levels. Priority 1 is what needs to happen now. Governance, we need to form cross-functional AI task forces that include faculty, IT, student services, administration, and student voices as well, not just the tech people. Across operations, we need to begin by launching AI literacy training for all faculty and staff so that they can model these skills for their juniors. When it comes to pedagogy, we need to start revisiting more seriously our academic integrity policies, many of which were created for a time and place where the rapid creation of high-quality text was just a far-off dream. And quite frankly, if your current policy still uses the phrase AI-generated content is prohibited with no further nuance, it needs to be updated today. Priority 2 is your 12 to 24-month horizon. Develop institutional guidance on AI and research, pilot AI tools for administrative efficiency, whether that's scheduling, advising, or accreditation documentation, and begin the hard work of systematically integrating AI literacy into your curriculum standards across all departments. Priority 3 is our far-off horizon. What we need is AI-ready data governance and agentic workflows for complex institutional practices with scalable and adaptive learning platforms. I want to pause on the academic integrity piece, however, because I think many institutions are stuck in what I call the AI detection trap. They're investing in AI detection software which frequently produces false positives and has been shown to flag non-native English speakers as having committed plagiarism at disproportionately higher rates. The reason this is problematic is that it erodes trust and puts faculty in an adversarial relationship with students that frankly doesn't work and doesn't support student learning and success. The paradigm shift is this instead. Instead of asking ourselves, did the student use AI, we need to be asking ourselves, did the student think? Did they struggle with these ideas and concepts? Did they wrestle with them? Did they try them on? Did they fail? We need to design assignments that are personal, iterative, and evidence of genuine engagement with course content. A student who can explain and defend their work, who can connect it to their own experiences, or who can extend it in conversation is the student that's learned something. And ultimately, that's what we're after. We should also, I think, focus on what AI cannot replace. Stanford research suggests a 16% decline in employment for workers in occupations the most exposed to AI, including software development, that once formers say hate them. That number should get everyone's attention, regardless of your field, however. But here's what I think it gets missed in the doom and gloom narrative. Automation doesn't eliminate work, and the skills that become valuable are precisely those that AI cannot replace. Looking at the table on the screen, we see things like empathetic leadership. We know that AI can simulate concern, but it can't feel it. And workers know the difference. When a team is demoralized, when a student is struggling, when a partnership is fracturing, you need a human in the room. From there, we get to critical inquiry. AI systems are persuasive, yes, and fluent most certainly, which makes them dangerous when they're wrong. The most valuable person in any AI integrated workflow is the one with the disciplinary or institutional knowledge to recognize when an output doesn't pass the smell test. In computer science, we call this sanity checking. Understand, however, that this isn't a technical skill, it's an epistemic one. From there, we move on to negotiation. AI can model outcomes, but it can't read a room. It can't pick up on hesitation behind somebody's tentative yes. It doesn't know when to push or push back. All of these things require an emotional attunement that's built through years of human experience. From there, we get to adaptability. AI is trained on historical data, always has been, always will be. Even the best models have at least a 3-month lag in their knowledge base. They are, by definition, backward-looking. The humans who will thrive in the next decade of the workplace are the ones who can lead organizations and communities through conditions that have no precedent in any training set. And I want to close this slide with a thinker that I found genuinely important for this conversation, and it comes from our friend Dr. Rosen and her book, The Extinction Experiment. It's namely that the progressive virtualization of our lives, the outsourcing of more and more experience to screens and algorithms, is slowly estranging us from capacities that make us fully human. Face-to-face communication, serendipity, and those awkward moments, and even our capacity for boredom, which is actually when creativity can happen at its best. Her work here offers us a serious philosophical warning, and one that I think belongs in every conversation on AI and education. So let me bring this home with 4 concrete recommendations for institutions like ours and for leaders like you. Number 1, shift from policies to frameworks. A policy says do this, don't do that. A framework asks, what are we trying to achieve, and how, if at all, does AI help us achieve that goal? At FCC, we're working on exactly this, integrating AI into our strategic plan rather than treating it as a compliance problem, requiring a shift across all levels of leadership, faculty, and students. Number 2, we need to work to foster algorithmic sovereignty. This one matters for any institution that serves multilingual or multicultural students, international students, or students from historically underrepresented communities. The AI tools most of us use by default were built on data that do not represent us or our values. Therefore, advocating for and partnering with initiatives that build more equitable AI tools becomes not just an ethical position, but an educational imperative. Number 3, we must begin to prioritize human-centered pedagogy instead of pedagogy at scale. As AI takes over more of the information delivery function, and understand it will, the human educator becomes more valuable, not less. But in a different way. We become mentors, we become facilitators of critical thinking, we become the people who help students figure out what to do with everything that the machine produces, how to separate the wheat from the chaff. That's a profound professional transformation for some of us, and it requires intentional, sustained faculty development. Number 4, invest in universal AI literacy. Ohio State, for example, has launched an AI fluency initiative that embeds AI education into every undergraduate curriculum. Humanities, arts, science, business, every student, every class. This is what equitable access to the future will look like. If only students in tech programs are prepared to understand AI and to push back against these systems, we've reproduced precisely the inequality that we're trying to avoid. That's the core of what I wanted to share with you today. And let me leave you with some questions to think about, which aren't on the screen because this is what happens when you're an administrator. You get called into a meeting and you forget to finish a PowerPoint. So I'll email you the questions. It sounds a bit like a student that I had there. But I'm going to go ahead and open it up to all of you because I've very clearly talked more than enough. And if you want to continue the conversation after this, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I'd be happy to talk about AI literacy, the work we're doing at FCC, or our Cyber 102 class that we're working through curriculum now. Thank you much. Oh, thank you.
If you have any questions for Dr. Pais, I'll be happy to hand the microphone to you.
Hello, thank you for speaking today. I really enjoyed hearing you. As far as emotional challenges with AI, I was wondering, do you think personally that the use of depressants and anxiety medication, all those is going to increase because people are experiencing less and less encounters with people and they're going to think, oh, I'm quiet today, I feel awkward, that's not normal now, type of thing.
So you're, like I said, budding applied computer scientist, so you're taking this a little bit out of my realm here, but here's one of the things that I'll say, right? We know that across the younger generations, whether it's Gen Z or Gen Alpha, instances of anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues have been rising steadily, right? That's not going away, whether it's due to increased social disconnection, growing up under constant threat of violence, right? I assume you're a student, I can't tell you're far away. Yes, okay. Gen Z was one of the first generations that had to grow up with active shooter drills, right? It's difficult to learn in that sort of high stress environment. It leaves the constant question in the back of your mind of, is today going to be the day, right? These are things that constrain mental health, right? I'm an elder millennial. I grew up when the first major school shooting happened. I remember watching it unfold on TV, but I didn't grow up with active shooter drills. At worst, I had a metal detector at the front of my school, right? So I think we're already seeing mental health become an increasing problem for the younger generations for a myriad of reasons, from the affordability crisis to the perception of the social system collapsing around them. That promise of go to school, do something that you love, and you'll be fine, no longer holds true, right? My worry when it comes to artificial intelligence systems and its potential impact on that is once we start to inject advertisements into the free models, right? And this is something that OpenAI is already doing, right? If you've grown up in the United States and you watch any broadcast or cable television, you are familiar with how many commercials there are for antidepressants, for anti-obesity drugs, for hair loss drugs, for things to help with sexual dysfunction, right? Americans are regularly marketed to for a little pill that will fix their problems. If we start injecting similar kinds of ads into free models that most people will be using, right, then we're just increasing their exposure to this. And it may not even look like an advert. We don't know yet. It could just look like a friendly suggestion from your chatbot that you like of, hey bro, you sound a little sad. Have you tried Zircon from our friends over at Pfizer? Right? And that's what would worry me as far as AI increasing that. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
Happy to. That back row, you're popping, I love it.
My question was, you were talking about jobs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that jobs like interpretation and translation would go away? Because I want to be a Spanish translator, and they're saying that empathy is very important, but maybe one day we won't care so much about empathy rather than just the translations.
Yeah, no, this is I think, a legitimate concern, right? Because we've already seen some erosion in the translation and interpreting space. I think it was back in 2024, I was giving a similar talk with a translation studies scholar at George Washington University. And at that time, he was like, well, accurate instantaneous translation, still far off, you still need the human. We're a whole lot closer to accurate instantaneous translation of text, right? That being said, there will still be moments where the human connection is going to matter far more, right? When you're sitting in your doctor's office and you're about to get that bad news of, no, sorry, it's cancer, right? And that needs to be delivered in the person's first language because that's all that they have access to. Do you want that coming from a Siri-sounding voice, or do you want that coming from a human face, right? Because there are also then important implications about professional ethics and the disclosure of personal information, right? In this case, HIPAA. Our tech friends out in the West Coast may want to assure us that, yes, the AI is HIPAA compliant. And I've had many an Amazon representative tell me, oh, it's HIPAA and FERPA compliant, don't worry. But you have no guarantees that they're not going to use that aggregated data to train a future model, right? So I would say in high-touch situations like that, we'll still have a need for it, right? I don't think that that goes away. There's also the fact that in some situations, we need the messiness of human interpretation. If we're doing something like interpreting a speech, for example, or interpreting like a slam poetry fest, right? These things still require the messiness of the human who doesn't just understand the one-for-one linguistic equivalency of terms, right? This lexical token for this lexical token, but also understands the cultural nuance, right? I'll give you an example of this. The number 250, does it mean anything to any of you? No? Okay. Well, in China, the number 250, R by Wu, doesn't just mean 250, it means painfully, excruciatingly stupid, right? So, when you hear somebody referred to as, that person's pretty 250, right? It may sound meaningless and direct translation fails us. We need the cultural competence to know what it means for that generation. Another really good example I'll use, Chinese again here. Chinese speakers have access to two pretty close sounding devices. One is ha-ha, the other is he-he, okay? You can already tell the difference from how I've said them. In Mandarin Chinese, ha-ha means, oh, that was genuinely funny, thank you, you've tickled me. He-he means, bro, stop, right? And those are things that we still need the human component for, right? Cultural relevancy can't be encoded, and certainly not quickly enough, right? Because some of you, Gen Z, heaven help us all, my dear friends, Gen Alpha is coming, right? You all got the 6-7, right? The yachts, I don't understand it. It's why I got out of the classroom, right? So we also then have the generational component of language and communication. That's something that AI systems will always lag behind, and why human interpretation will still be valuable. Though I will admit those numbers may decrease. But thank you.
Hi. Oh, wow.
Such presence. I love it.
So, one of the things that you talked about that I really agree with and enjoy, but it's also something that gives me a little anxiety is the trying to, I guess, sort of spread and democratize the use of AI. It reminds me of when the internet first came on board. It was the domain of computer scientists and tech companies, and then the world started using it. Everybody had to become tech literate, and we were training people, kids, parents, grandparents, how to use technology. And AI sort of reminds me of something like that, because coding is something that we don't need to know. I don't think so. Even using Excel, people didn't have to learn how to use Excel.
Yeah.
But AI, to me, it's almost like being computer literate. So, but I don't feel as though we're addressing AI like this. It's everything that you said. It's about what policies and what you shouldn't do and what have you. But when is society going to embrace it and look at it the way that you're describing it? Hey, this is something that if you're going to be a a functioning tech literate person,
Yeah.
this is something you have to have in your toolbox.
Yeah. And here I'll say, if I could give you an exact date, then I wouldn't be standing here. I'd make a much larger salary and have a very fancy title, maybe something like AI evangelist, prognosticator, something like that. But what I will say is we've been here before. I appreciate you pointing out the parallels to the internet, right? Because oftentimes when I'm teaching to a room full of teachers instead of a mixed audience, right, and I ask them how many of you are nervous about teaching in an AI-rich environment, all the hands go up. And I have to remind them, we have been here before. In the early 2000s, we were freaking out about easy access to Google and Wikipedia and students having easy access to information with very little vetting or effort, right? When you look probably around my age, right? When we were younger, we had to go to the library, flip through the card catalog, which I guarantee you most people here don't remember, and we had to go physically hunt for the information we needed, right? And sometimes it was a fruitless hunt. You didn't give up. You went back to the card catalog, you flipped again, you learned how to read the Dewey Decimal System so you could locate things and understand how information is located in space, right? So there was this worry when people had ready access to Google because now they don't need to expend that cognitive effort, right? They can just click the first result and be assured that it's going to be pretty close to what they want, right? But we learned pretty quickly as educators that no, we still have to teach people how to use these tools. We have to teach them that when they get those results on Google, or heaven forbid, Ask Jeeves from the early 2000s, right? That there's an algorithm deciding what they're going to see. And they need to be aware of this because that algorithm is mediating their experience and the encounter with knowledge, right? And we accepted that, I think, largely by the 2010s, right? Rewind the clock further, early 90s, we were freaking out about computers in the classroom. It was the end of education as we knew it when that little beige box popped up. Rewind further, my friends in math were freaking out in what was it, the 1960s when calculators became easily accessible. It was the end of numeracy, as we know. It wasn't. We just had to shift how we taught, right? How we engage with the technology and use the technology to augment learning instead of replacing it. Now, what I see across institutions and across the globe is we are still early in the adoption cycle, so we're still in that reactionary space, right? I think as it kind of cools and becomes just a part of our lives, right? A technology that is there and it becomes normalized, that's when we'll be able to move away from this reaction of we must police, we must contain, to this is here, we have no choice at the end of the day, right? So how do we make sure that people are engaging with this thing ethically? How do we make sure that they can spot things like hallucinations, right? How do we equip them to understand that there's still value in the struggle of learning, right? As opposed to just going to ChatGPT and being like, hey, can you explain nested for loops for me, right? But instead struggling with trying on for loops in programming and getting it dead wrong, which most novice programmers do once you start nesting it past a certain level, right? But that again requires a shift that we're not quite there yet. I think we're still in that sort of reactionary moment, right? But I have hope, but I am a foolish optimist, I will say that.
Dr. Biles, thank you so much. We have two more questions, very briefly, and then as I remind everyone, will be a lunch reception that is already set up in room 107, so please feel free to join us.
Thank you for the talk. Yeah. So one of your reasons for integrating AI into the learning experience was that it's too costly to have one-to-one tutors, right?
At scale.
At scale, right. And one thing you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation was the energy costs of AI, and that it may double by 2035. So I'm wondering how we bring these two things into alignment, right? Isn't that a significant cost, maybe equal or surpassing the cost of a one-to-one tutor?
Whether or not it's going to surpass the cost of a one-to-one tutor, again, at scale, is a different question, right? And I would be a fool not to acknowledge the energy and clean water resource burden of modern AI systems. However, I want to also point out that that has been trending downwards somewhat in new models, right? So as we iterate and we train new models, they are becoming more energy efficient. We saw this with the Chinese DeepSeek model, which was trained at a fraction of the cost. Right, fraction of the cost here means a fraction of the energy, a fraction of the fresh water. And as tech companies have become aware of how much fresh water they're consuming, and as there has been public backlash against it, and I would say much needed public backlash against it, right? And this is coming from me, an AI apologist, right? They have started developing cooling systems, because that's what you're using the water for in AI, is to cool the servers, that don't rely on liquid resources and instead use cool air, ambient air cooling, right? Heat exchangers and other thermal systems instead, right? We can't get there without first being where we are now and having people like ourselves in this room identifying that's a problem and it needs to be fixed, right? Now, understand that 415 terawatt number is a little bit tricky because it doesn't just include AI systems, it includes all planetary compute. So every time that you are clicking through an Amazon link, you're using planetary compute. You are accessing a database that exists somewhere in this world. It is not on your local edge device. That's part of that 415 number. And that number has been creeping up for decades because of big data, right? Now, when it comes to what is our sort of ethical imperative when it comes to this, that's why I say we need AI literacy, because each and every one of us should also be encouraged to make that decision for ourselves. So a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's what I got for you for now.
Hi, I just have a question. I wanted just to tell you that I agree with you in when you were referring about the problem between AI and different languages. Instead of the supremacy of English, when they go into other languages, they're still AI. I don't think it's able to be up to par in terms of finding out the differences between accents and ways of expression. I recently spent 5 months in Dominican Republic. I speak Spanish, but I still have problems. I have to use my humanness to understand some of the nuances of the Spanish speaking in Santo Domingo, because ChatGPT will not help me with that.
No, and I think you bring in an important part here, and I want to expand on it very, very quickly. A language like Spanish, there is not just one Spanish. There are multiple Spanishes, right? Just like with the English language, there is not one English. There are many Englishes across the globe, right? And because that training data, that English language training data has been based on a preponderance of standard edited English, white middle class English, it does that quite well. But even today, let me rephrase that, even as of 6 months ago, the last time I ran this test, if you turn to ChatGPT and say, hey, take this passage and recast it into African American vernacular English for me, AAVE, homeboy's gonna get canceled, right? It is farcical and racist in how it does it, right? I've tried the same thing with Chicano English, which is something that a lot of my cousins in Southern California speak. And do you know what the first phrase is almost every time if there's any enthusiasm in the core passage? Orale! I'm like, what? No. Okay? That is like Cheech and Chong level of farcical. Yes, Cheech and Chong was great in the 60s, but it has not aged well, right? And this comes because of the paucity of training data in Chicano English, in African American vernacular English. And it's why, to the question earlier about translation, the human component matters. Because even things like Latin GPT has most likely been trained, I'm willing to bet, primarily on New World Spanish. And most likely New World Spanish from Central America, right? Which means it's going to do poorly with Argentinian Spanish, with Spanish from the DR, and it's going to do horribly with Castilian Spanish, right? And so we tend to then sort of marginalize those communities even further, right? Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And please join us with the lunch reception in 107.